Coming up on this week's show, Windows 98 gets a new update.
Resident Evil 2 finally comes to the Sega Saturn.
And we're joined by Krazy Ken from the YouTube channel The Computer Clan.
And the Retro Hour podcast is made possible each week thanks to our good friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books I know you're going to love is Sinclair ZX Spectrum, a visual compendium celebrating the artistry of the pioneering UK computer industry with this gorgeous visual compendium packed with classic games for the Spectrum. Check that out and the rest of their retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 333. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to another packed podcast, taking you on a journey inside the world of classic video games and technology, bringing you up to speed on all the big stories that have been happening over the last week, and of course, bringing you a very special guest in the second half of this week's show. I did notice actually someone on our Facebook page pointed out that now we're at episode 333. We are technically halfway to hell.
I was literally thinking that, you know, when you said the 333 in the intro there, I was like, oh gosh, we're halfway to Satan, halfway to hell. What would we do if we made it to 666? Like, I really hope we do, but like, would we do a horror episode or like
it sounds like a metal album that you'd do, you know, Halfway to Hell, Joe.
Halfway to Hell, yeah, I like that.
On Joe's new album.
Yeah, maybe.
But listen, there's no evil in this week's show, only the good stuff. We've got some big news stories to talk about very soon, and an incredible guest as well. And I was actually quite pleased because, I mean, we kind of all have a little bit of an input into who comes on the show. We'll kind of reach out to different guests and stuff as well. But Joe, you really surprised me when you got this week's guest, because it's someone that I've watched on YouTube for a long, long time, and actually is a very computer-focused channel.
Yeah, this was Krazy Ken from Computer Clan, which I absolutely loved that he came on, and he's such a, you know, charismatic guy, and he's quite a young guy as well, but it turns out he's been, you know, on YouTube for 14 years now, which is just incredible. Yeah. But like you say, we all kind of have our roles with the podcast, and you know, I'm not the guy who gets the guests, you know, you guys do that, and I got Krazy Ken, and this was just like, it was crazy. I just thought, you know what, watching his channel, let me just reach out, because he just felt really right for the show, and he said yes straight away, and like, I'm really, really glad you guys enjoyed it. Like, I was like, oh, I'll jump on it, but Dan was a bit like, it is very computer heavy, and you know, like, I'll gracefully back down. I wouldn't have known what we were talking about. But Ravi, you said after the interview that it was a really, really, really great interview, which I was really good one.
About. Yeah, Ken talks all about the Mac in this. It's a very Macintosh focused interview, and we've been like looking at Mac because we haven't really had popularity of Mac in Europe and other places, and it's really amazing to see this Apple stuff, rare Apple stuff, a lot of the history, a lot of connection with the next computer. Like, it was a really lively interview as well, because Ken's really like out there.
He's crazy.
Yeah. And me and Dan could really get into the meat of the stuff as well, because it was just like very computery, which I didn't expect from you, Joe. I expected like the developer of Donkey Kong or something to come on.
Well, that'd be awesome as well.
But it would be great as well.
That's your next guest.
That's my next one. You've just like thrown the gauntlet down for me now, haven't you? But yeah, man, like I say, I just thought it'd be a really good show, and I'm really glad like how well it came out. So really excellent stuff.
One thing that we really go in depth into, because I mean, the reason I found Ken's channel, it's part of a collective, the Computer Clan. So he's got a few other people that help him out on it as well. But really, they specialize heavily in rare Apple prototypes.
Yeah, and
we kind of get into
a lot of internal ones as well, you know.
We kind of get into Apple like how he tracks those down and how he manages to find, you know, these prototypes that really are meant to be only kept inside Apple, and whether he gets a bit nervous that one day he might get that email off Tim Cook, oi, take that video down and bring that back. So it's a really interesting one. Also, we go into like, you know, Next, you know, Steve Jobs' company that he set up outside of Apple when he left in the 80s, and also we get really nerdy talking about even BeOS and Being, a company that Apple nearly bought that could have sent them in a completely different direction. So something a bit different for us, but I really enjoyed this one.
You know what excited me? Our discussion on weird mice, Apple mice.
Yeah.
that was really interesting. And it's a great interview. I think you're all going to really enjoy this. And, if you're not a Mac user, you're not an Apple user, listen to it because there's a lot of crossover with other subjects as well.
Yeah, because the Mac is so big these days. But a lot of people probably don't realize that Apple had like a really bad time in the 90s, particularly. I remember reading there was something like 99 days away from bankruptcy.
Yeah, that
would
have been the time to buy shares, wouldn't it?
Oh, if only. So you're going to enjoy this week's guest, a brilliant Krazy Ken from the Computer Clan. He's coming up in around 25 minutes from now. Now, one thing about doing a podcast that focuses on the classic age of video games, even though the video games industry is still quite a young one. I mean, really, it's only been around about, 40 years, really, commercially. But it does mean, as, the people that founded the industry age, unfortunately, we do occasionally have to say goodbye to some of them. And it was very sad to read this week that Sega legend, who also worked for Atari and Sony, Bernie Stolar, passed away on Friday last week. And actually, this was it quite hit us quite hard because we've been talking to Bernie for about a year now, haven't we?
Yeah, and he was never in a situation to be able to do an interview, sadly.
Yeah, really wanted to, though, didn't he?
Yeah, really wanted to, and he expressed how much he wanted to come on. And, he's an absolute legend. Like, he was in so many companies, it's unbelievable. He's at Atari in the original Lynx division as well, when that came out in about 1989. And also he was in Sony Computer Entertainment of America, launched the original PlayStation. He became president of Sega of America, where he led the development of the Dreamcast as well. And he worked for Google later on as their games evangelist.
Yeah, he's had a really interesting career. And he even picked that, the Dreamcast 9999 date that I think, particularly for our audience in North America, whenever you mention the Dreamcast, that date sticks in their mind, doesn't it, as when it was released. So he was, and there's some really interesting articles. There's one on Forbes that I'll link up that I think is the best one that I've read that talks to so many people who worked with Bernie and knew him and really gives you a nice rounded picture of what he was like. One thing I think he kind of got unfairly tarnished with, and I'll link up this thread on Twitter because it's quite interesting from an account called Mega Drive Shock. He often gets remembered as the guy that killed off the Sega Saturn with that quote, the Saturn's not our future. But actually, there's a series of tweets that kind of goes in depth and expands that interview and kind of reframes what he meant. So it kind of looks like that was taken a bit out of context, really, because his role at Sega at the time was to be focusing on their future plans.
Yeah.
So at the time, his plan was working on the Dreamcast. So he didn't say that, stop making stuff for the Dreamcast, just obviously we're working on the next thing.
And he kind of killed off that idea of RPG and stuff, but you had to be kind of brutal to progress. Like, can you imagine going from Sony and then going to a rival Sega?
Yeah, you're right. When he joined Sega, it was a failing company, wasn't it? To go from Sony, who were top of the game, to Sega at that time, a very difficult move. But obviously the Dreamcast, even though commercially it wasn't a huge success, I think in terms of the retro gaming community, most of us have a special place in our heart for the Dreamcast, and Bernie was obviously a massive part of that as well. So if you want to read that tribute to Bernie Stolar in Forbes, I'll link that up in our show notes at theretrohour.com, and rest in peace, Bernie. So we have got lots of other news stories to get into in just a moment. This is one that I didn't expect to see. Windows 98 got a new update in the last couple of weeks. Although, if you want to get it, turns out you've got to be on Mars.
So is that you going to Mars then, Dan?
Now, obviously, Windows 98, came out in 1998. Shock horror. But I think the last update from Microsoft, I've got a feeling, was around 2005.
Oh, wow.
So obviously, it's, Microsoft don't support it anymore. Mm-hmm. But the thing about having stuff in space is it's not like they can just get up there and change the hardware.
You can't go up with a USB stick.
Exactly.
We're launching Ravi into space with a USB stick.
Oh, God.
And a copy of Windows Vista.
I've travelled many years, and now I find the CD's been scratched, or there's some errors on the USB stick. Got to go back.
Well, this is the European Space Agency's Mars Express spacecraft. Now, this was launched around 20 years ago, 2003. And at the time, obviously, they've got to work on the software that it runs for a few years before. So even though stuff like Windows 2000 and XP was already out then, they'd actually built it on a Windows 98 foundation. And now it's in space, and they want to do an update to this that they can send remotely that really has to update the underlying Windows 98 operating system. And they reckon that this is going to increase how much data the probe can send back to Earth and improve the quality of it as well. So it's going to allow them to see a lot more in depth into the areas, particularly the South Pole of Mars. So it is quite interesting that technically Windows 98 is helping us explore the universe.
Well, I guess that they kind of must have custom made this update then, or it might be one of these additional ones that you have to download, because Windows 98 went on to second edition, SE, which was a huge kind of update. But I can imagine this is a space edition, maybe, SE, that's kind of been sent out. And I guess they're doing it via radio, sending the data across. So that's probably the only way they can communicate. And I can imagine that connection's going to be pretty slow. So it might take a long time to update.
But this has been making headlines everywhere. And the reason we're talking about it is, a new update for Windows 98. I don't expect you're going to see Mars Edition on archive.org anytime soon. Obviously, this is very custom for their hardware, but it is quite interesting when you think how many kind of obsolete systems and computer operating systems and hardware is still running in various places. Here on Earth, we've often talked about it as in if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But stuff like this, it's interesting that they've got to kind of keep this software supported because there's no other option to replace it. So.
Wasn't there a Game Boy on the space station as well? So I can imagine you're right that there is lots of old stuff like that. I think there is actually a trend of using old satellites for stuff that they're not supposed to be used for, stuff like satellite phone conversations and stuff like that. People jack them and take them over, hackers do. And I think that's quite interesting that you've got all this retro tech orbiting around the Earth or other planets. And some of it does need updating.
I just imagine aliens finding it in 1,000 years and having a ball on 3D Pinball Space Cadet on Windows 98.
Playing Minecraft. Not Minecraft, Minesweeper.
So, very cool. I'll link up that story if you want to check it out as well. Now, of course, Sega have been in the news quite a lot. We did talk about it last week. The Mega Drive Mini 2, and there is a couple of updates on that now. Something that we were speculating about on last week's show. Are they going to release a Mega CD 2 to clip onto it? And, of course, they are.
Yeah, this looks really cool. Is there an official name? Kind of because obviously the Tower of Power was kind of I guess not the official name, but the Tower of Power was kind of the name for the Mega Drive 1, where it had the Sega CD on the bottom and the 32X in the top. Whereas there isn't really, is there a nickname really for the Sega CD 2 clip-on? It's just
the Sexy Cider.
The Sexy Cider. Have you just come up with that now?
So it goes on the side. yeah, it's made it random.
But no, it does look smart. As always, makes me want to buy it. Matching with the Japanese style one, so it's got the blue buttons rather than the red buttons. But I'm sure there will be a release with the the PAL kind of version of it and stuff. But it just looks really cute and nice. I'd love to have it on my shelf. But they also announced an additional 11 games for the Mega Drive Mini 2. So obviously they'd already announced about 10, 11 last week, the week before.
And everyone was kicking off. Oh, this is not on there.
And they were also very Mega CD based as well.
Yeah, there was
Sega CD titles that they had announced. So it's a bit of a teaser,
Yeah, that's kind of the big thing, isn't it? Of this new mini console. Obviously, it's got the Sega CD games on there as well. But they've announced 11 Mega Drive games for it. So some pretty good games on there. Might take your fancy down. So we've got Outrun, Afterburner 2, Night Striker, The Ninja Warriors, Starblade, Splathouse 2, which I think is a great addition. Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, Mega Panel, Puzzle and Action, Itchdarant R, I believe how you say that, Columns 3, and then Star Mobile, which is a Mega Drive debut. I'm not too sure what that one is. But yeah, we've still got about another 30 games to be announced for it. So I don't know what they're going to come up with because of, the Mega Drive had a big library of about 550, maybe 600 games. And obviously we've already had 40, 50 on the first Mega Drive. And now they're doing all different ones by the sounds of things.
Well, if it's Mega CD, we talked about this.
Yeah,
week. Would it be Night Trap and Sewer Shark and
we've
like that?
We've only had a few CD games announced so far, so it will be nice if they do like 20 CD games on there. And like you say, we do get like Night Trap and stuff like that as well. Because how controversial would that be? Like, well, it probably wouldn't even be that controversial, but just mental that Night Trap came under so much, fire and stuff like that in the early 90s, for it then to just be released on a mini console in 2022 would just be hilarious.
Dragged into court, it was a huge controversial court case, and I think actually that and Mortal Kombat kind of led to the rating system within games.
And then you play that game though, and how tame
how
is Night Trap?
It was a big sensational kind of thing where the press blew it up, didn't they? So it would be interesting though to see stuff like Tomcat Alley and
Corpse
Time
Killer.
Gal. And,
I'd love a bit of Corpse Killer on there.
Oh, yes.
Time Gal, that's a good idea as well, actually, yeah.
It does seem interesting because, obviously we've got kind of the games you'd expect on the first one. Sonic was on there, Echo the Dolphin and that kind of thing. It does seem like the game selection on the Mega Drive Mini 2, a little bit more eclectic. It's a little bit all over the place. You've got, obviously the massive arcade games, stuff like Outrun, that's on there, which I'm very pleased to see. Splatterhouse 2 as well. I'm not sure how commercially successful that game is, but it's definitely a cult classic.
Yeah,
isn't it, Splatterhouse 2?
It does seem like it's far from like all the scraping the bottom of the barrel here or anything like that. It's just at what point do does it become a little bit, like you say, more obscure? Because it's like, like I say, there's like hundreds and hundreds of Mega Drive games and Genesis games. But if you ask the kind of like, even like a casual fan, like more than a casual fan, I'm a massive Mega Drive fan, but if you sat me down and said, right, list 100 Mega Drive games now and CD games, like just write them down for the next hour, like I might even struggle, to come up with some really popular titles that everybody's heard of. So,
I don't think like Columns 3.
It's random.
Like,
why 3?
Yeah, because Columns 1 was on the last one.
It does seem like a weird addition.
It is odd, but what I'm hoping won't happen is that the next kind of 20, 30 games that get announced, which haven't been announced yet, are just like the games that were on the last Mega Drive, it's also got Sonic 1, 2, and 3, Streets of Rage 1 and 2. Like, I do want it to be like 50 games that haven't been done yet. And I am really hopeful that, like Ravi says, that we get like the likes of Night Trap and Time Gal and stuff like that. I think that'd be such a cool selling point. And the fact that they've admitted that they can't really afford to do the Saturn Mini and the Dreamcast Mini at the moment, give us this obscurity, give us this like what some people might not have played and stuff. I think it would be a really
just
good idea.
be fun to see that little letterbox video display.
Yeah,
squint your eyes as you play
on your 50-inch TV.
Blown up in HD.
It does kind of feel like this game selection so far feels more like for the fans, doesn't it, than the casual consumer. I'm not sure whether we're going to see any, Sonic 2 or 3 on here. It hasn't been announced already, has it? Any Sonic
There was
games?
Sonic
Was
CD.
No, just Sonic CD.
Sonic CD, that's right.
I could be wrong, but I don't think they've announced any games which were on the last Mega Drive Mini yet.
And the fact that Sonic Origins is out there and they're probably wanting to buy that instead of the originals. Although I've got to talk about that because last week in our patrons bit, I was saying how hyped I was for Sonic Origins. I was about to buy it. Then I read the reviews.
Oh, they're not good.
Have you guys...
I've seen the reviews and I've seen it's taken a bit of a hammering and stuff like the upscaling in there. And there's been a bit of negativity about the DLC as well. The fact that it's kind of like a lot of the content needs to be unlocked with paid DLC.
That's a shame.
I do want it, but I'll probably wait till the price comes down a bit, I think, after reading that. Maybe not play, full whack for that game. But if you're a Sega fan, plenty of stuff to look forward to at the moment. So we'll link up that full list in our show notes as well. While we're talking about Sega, I imagine you were practically wetting your pants with excitement about this news, Joe. Resident Evil 2 is coming to the Sega Saturn at last.
Yeah, sort of. So obviously... I was going to say famously, probably not that famously, it's the Sega Saturn at the end of the day. There was a Resident Evil 1 port for the Sega Saturn, which had a lot of differences to the original Resident Evil. I mean, maybe at a glance, it just looks like the same game, but the graphics were very different. The whole way the Saturn works is completely different to how the PlayStation 1 works.
It's like the way that it renders polygons.
Yeah, the way it renders polygons.
Quads versus triangles and stuff
yes,
like that.
yeah, brilliant. I'm glad you know it all, Ravi. But like with the dithering effects and stuff, it's all very, very different. But this is a survival prototype engine, it's called at the moment, which was revealed last week. And I've seen this I'm in a lot of Sega Saturn like forums and stuff, and buying and collecting forums and stuff, because I just love the Saturn. And Resident Evil 2, they pretty much, by the time this was kind of coming, they were moving on to the Dreamcast, and they just said it was going to be too difficult to get such a big game on the Sega Saturn. So it never happened. The Sega port for Resident Evil 2 was on the Dreamcast, which is a really nice port. But this comes from a YouTuber called Casto Group, who've obviously said they've nothing to do with Capcom. It's not affiliated with Capcom or anything like that. But essentially, they're running Resident Evil 2 on a Sega Saturn. But to do this, they've essentially had to make their own game engine for it. So it's kind of running in its own prototype engine, which is called the Survival Prototype Engine. And so far, they've only got a couple of minutes of gameplay going. It's not got any sound, and they're only playing as Claire so far. So it's very, very, very basic compared to like the final Resident Evil 2 product. But for a fan of Resident Evil and a fan of the Sega Saturn, for me, this was like, oh my God, this is insane. This is crazy. I don't know if you guys have seen the video and are familiar enough with Resident Evil, but the graphics have taken a bit of a hit.
Yeah, they look a bit like, do you know Tomb Raider when it came out on the Saturn, and the difference in quality where it's not such stretched textures, it's more kind of, it's hard to say, it's more kind of like broken up. Like low res for the actual characters.
Yeah, it is quite low res, and essentially it looks a lot like what Resident Evil 1's polygons look like, and that might just be because it is running on the Saturn hardware. Obviously it's a video on YouTube, but they are claiming this is running on the Saturn. It's not running in like, emulation or anything like that, which is really cool. But what makes me laugh is like things that are going to come is like the door animation. They're currently working on getting the door animation in there. And obviously you're going to get the sound in there and stuff like that. So a really, really cool project. Hopefully, Capcom won't shut it down. Or if they are shutting it down, it's because they're doing an official release of Resident Evil 2 for the Saturn, which I don't think we will see.
Well,
keep dreaming.
Keep dreaming. No, but I don't see how they can shut this one down, because this is an engine that's using the Resident Evil 2 data. But it's just the engine that's developed. So obviously there's going to be a way that you can import the data or use the original disc. Or something to load it up. So I don't think they've got any assets, but what they're essentially doing is reverse engineering the engine to create this survival engine. And I don't know, that would be really hard to kind of do them. But,
I mean, they could say they're using their
can get
their characters and everything, couldn't they?
But
I imagine Capcom generally, from what I've seen, they're not not like Nintendo.
No, they're usually pretty cool with it. We spoke about it before, but it's interesting, like all the enemies are the same zombie, whereas Resident Evil 2 actually had a lot of different, it did have a lot of different, zombie-like sprites, I guess. They're obviously having to use the same enemy throughout, and then also it does skip, like I say, it skips the animations, it also skips all the clips near the start of the game when you first walk into the Kendo gun shop and stuff like that. So one I'm going to keep my eye on. Hopefully in a couple of months' time or a year or so, I'll be able to report on it and say it's a fully fledged game and you can, play it on your EverDrives and stuff like that. So fingers crossed.
Well, I was going to say the frame rate on it looks really smooth because it's locked at...
Even with lots of zombies on the screen, there's no slowdown.
Yeah, there's no slowdown, and like Dan says, it's locked at 33 frames per second, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you look at the intro as well, I'll link up the video so people can check it out. At the start of it, it says initializing using DRAM 4 megabytes. So I'm wondering whether it needs, the RAM expansion cartridge, which would make sense.
Yeah, that would make sense, yeah.
Yeah, because it looks quite demanding for the Saturn. But yeah, very cool. I think it's always amazing when the community kind of, take it upon themselves to release these games that never were.
Yeah.
That fans hope for many years now. So definitely one to keep your eye on. I'll put up everything we know in our show notes as well. Now, this weekend, if you join us on Patreon, it's a good time to join, actually, because you're going to get plenty of perks for being a patron supporter of this show. And can we just say, what a massive, massive gratitude we've got to all our patrons, because we really couldn't do this podcast without your support. So if you enjoy what we do and you'd like to help the cause, throw a little bit into the tip jar just so we can keep the lights on, we can keep episodes coming out every week. And actually, if you join us this weekend, you will get a new episode of our patrons exclusive podcast, The Retro Hour After Hours. Now this time, these I think are always my favourite ones, when we take it back to a particular year in gaming and technology. We talk about all the big releases in that year, plenty of memories and stuff as well. Although actually, bearing in mind this was the year that you were born, Joe,
I was
maybe not that many memories for you.
Well, I purposely picked 1989 because of about a week or so ago, I was trying to come up with ideas for the Patreon. And I ended up doing like the next kind of like 10 episodes, like ideas. And I thought, you know what, let's do the months we were born in. Let's do the year, talk about the year that we were born. So I went for 1989 because I was born in June 89. So I thought it'd be quite interesting. And although we all would have been very young or not born yet, I think we're going to know a lot of big things happened in 89. And I'm sure we've got a lot of things, to talk about. And
there were a lot of changes in gaming culture there. But yeah, also, if you guys do support the Patreon, you get an ad-free episode as well. So you do get the After Hours podcast, you get an ad-free episode, and you get to join our Patreon community, which is on Discord. Awesome bunch of people, but also you get to do the Patrons Meetup, which we just had recently, and that was really good fun.
Yeah, we've got another one of those coming up. We do these once a month on a Sunday where a bunch of us all get together on Google Meet. We just have a bit of a nerd out session for a couple of hours, kind of like a virtual users group meeting. It's always incredible to see new people joining us as well. And we always like to have a little look at your gaming collection and room tours, because every time we get someone new on, they're like, oh, I'll give you a little tour of my gaming collection. Don't know about you guys, my jaw normally drops.
Well,
yeah.
Whenever I see our page.
This time we had a guy, Gareth, who's a Retro Hammer, who's one of our great supporters and actually staff on Discord at the Retro Hour. And he was showing this huge section of his house that he actually had, which was this area that he was turning into a kind of LAN arena. So you could go around his house and do a LAN party and all play Doom on some classic PCs.
So we'd love to see you as part of our patrons community, and you can join for just a couple of pounds, couple of dollars, couple of euros a month. All the details are at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into this week's special guest, Krazy Ken from the Computer Clan is coming up very soon. If we're talking about mega nerdy things that really impress us, we've got to talk about this. The Floppatron has had an update. Now, for people that might not be familiar with the Floppatron, tell us what it is, Ravi.
The Floppatron is a very interesting device. I'm sure you might have seen these videos on YouTube where you've got a Star Wars Imperial March played on floppy disks.
That is actually the Floppatron 1, isn't it? Where the viral video from 2011 where it plays the Imperial March. I got tagged in that so many times around then, like all my mums and aunties and stuff. Like, Joe likes retro stuff and Star Wars. Well, I'm going to tag him in this now.
Well, the guy creating it is Zadronsniak. I think that's how you say his name. And he's basically expanded the Floppatron into a full orchestra. This is absolutely mental. So he's got 512 floppy disk drives all connected together, 16 hard drives, and 4 flatbed scanners as well, because the scanners always make that kind of kind of sounds
with the motors.
Yeah, and the floppy disks just sound amazing. Now, what he's done with this is pretty awesome. Like the article's on The Verge, and it's actually referring to the old steam organs. And this used to be a thing, very British, that you'd turn up to an event and there'd be a guy in a steam organ, and he'd kind of pump it up, and they'd have these like paper sheets with holes in them. They'd run them through, and they'd actually play like the latest dance tunes or something. So you'd be there, and there'd be like an old guy with a steam organ playing like Mr. Vane or There's No Limit or something. It was pretty awesome. And this works on the same kind of principle. So he's actually connected it to a PC using a MIDI converter, and then that connects to a gateway, and they have all individual controllers, and then these run arrays of the floppy drives, and each of the floppy drives would be triggered by MIDI. So they would go as a different MIDI device, and the whole thing together just sounds absolutely immense. I can't imagine how loud it is and how much electricity it takes up. His bill is going to be really expensive for running this.
Do you want to have a listen then to what 512 floppy disk drives, 16 hard drives, and 4 flatbed scanners sound like together? Here it is. This is the Flopatron 3.0.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I love the different pitches
Yeah,
that it's got as well, how it slows down and speeds up
does
again. Very
really
impressive.
honestly remind me of those steam organs as well. I'm sure you used to see a few
Yeah.
of them in Yorkshire in your youth.
How old do you think I am? So,
The retro years,
Yeah, it's a school
1889.
So yeah, this is incredible, and by far, I think probably the geekiest thing we've ever talked about on this podcast. But I love it. So if you're going to check out the full video, I'll stick that in our show notes as well. Now let's talk about another story. Talking about Windows, an old edition. We already talked about Windows 98 getting a new update, but this is a headline I didn't think I'd ever see. Windows 95 running on the Mega Drive. Well, not quite. This is a simulation of Windows 95.
Finally, Joe can go on Windows 95 and enjoy it.
I've been on Windows 95, not on the Mega Drive though. But yeah, this is I just can't believe how fast it's all running. You know, like you say, it's a simulation, so I don't know, how much is really going on. But the fact that it's actually running on the Mega Drive just makes me want like a physical Mega Drive cartridge of it, in the box and everything on my shelf.
Yeah,
Which they are releasing. Is that right? Is this coming out on physical?
yeah. It's actually you can buy the actual cartridge printed and a case for it as well. Yeah,
Yeah, this is by Mikey LD.
yeah.
I think it's actually called Mikey LD 95.
Well, this is quite funny because the guy who's created it, Mikey Aldi, he's replaced everything with his face. So, he's even got a section with the dancing baby. You remember the dancing baby gif?
Oh, the GIF,
yeah,
yeah.
but the baby's his head. It's amazing. So, what it is he's actually releases music. So it's got 20. It's like a package for his music releases, and it's got 20 original songs that he's made on there. But it's in this Windows theme, so it starts up as Windows 95. You have the desktop. You've even got Clippy on the desktop. You got a start menu. You can do stuff like reset it and get mail in your inbox, and then suddenly you get stuff like the I love you virus sent to you. You get like certain stuff in there. So it's a simulator. It simulates internet browsers as well. So there's a few like absolutely insane sites of the 90s with GIFs
like the
everywhere.
Hamster Dance
Yeah.
and LGO City sites. And
then there's like little versions of the games as well.
yeah, so I think this is really good. And what a great idea. Because we all know that the music industry these days is very saturated. And just trying to get noticed, I think you've got to kind of do something that's going to make the headlines to get your tracks noticed. And really, like you said, Ravi, this is just a wrapper for his new album, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
With 20 original songs on there. Obviously, he's put a lot of work into it. Games on here like, 3D Maze. There's Hacky Sack as well, Reflex. All these games have been ported to this too. But it looks like when you put it in, it boots up what appears to be a Windows 95 style desktop. And he's got all the icons there from Windows 95 as well that you use the Mega Drive controller to navigate between. And obviously you press A or press start to open the start menu as well. And it looks like it works really well. But yeah, I just think, there's a lot of nostalgia in there as well. But in terms of releasing music for the Mega Drive, this is a really unique and clever way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like he's copied every asset pretty much. It must have taken quite an effort to actually get this going, because I noticed that he's got like different displays in there. So you've got like hot dog stand and all the old kind of like color schemes that you could get for it. And at the very end, this was the ultimate nostalgia hit for me. At the very end, it says it's now safe to turn your console off once Windows is shut down.
So you can get it from his website, mikeyld.itch.io. like you said, there is a physical cartridge available. The first run.
I think the
cartridges
first run sold out. Yeah, straight away.
Yeah, second run's coming in August. So if you want to get hold of it, you can pre-order now. But also, you can just download the ROM file if you've got an EverDrive or you want to run it on an emulator. And it's one of these, name your own price, so you can pay whatever you want. But it looks like a hell of a lot of work has gone into this, and just how mind-blowing it is to see the Windows 95 interface running on the Sega Mega Drive.
Yeah, it's just like, why hasn't somebody done this before? This is so cool.
So yeah, if you want to get hold of that, I'll put it. And everything else we talk about, you don't have to Google around for the stories. You'll find them all on your podcast app of choice or in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now we're going to be talking to this week's special guest, Krazy Ken from Computer Clan, in just a minute. And before we do that, quick reminder, actually, if you want a bit of extra Ravi this weekend in your podcasting life, you've been doing a bit of moonlighting this week, Ravi.
Yeah, I've betrayed you guys, and I've jumped onto This Week in Retro. So you can check that podcast out. That's a fantastic one with Neil from RMC, and he's been running that. It's kind of like our news section, but a bit longer, basically, with more detail.
More in depth and polished, I think, is the words you're looking for, Ravi.
But I did enjoy
Ravi's
it, and it's on video as well, so that should be on YouTube.
Yeah, Ravi's been getting a few tips on how to do a professional podcast for This Week in Retro, so you can check them out. When's it out, tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah, so This Week in Retro, if you want some extra Ravi in your life this week. A big thank you as well for the latest Apple podcast reviews. A few of those that have come in over the last couple of weeks. We'll really appreciate those. If you get a chance to leave us one little 5-star rating in your podcast app of choice, a little nice review, that always helps us get in front of new people. So a really good way to support this show. And next, we are going to be getting really nerdy about all things Apple, prototypes, classic Macs, next BeOS, all of that with our special guest, Krazy Ken from Computer Clan, is on the way next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite part of the show when we welcome on a very special guest. And, Ravi and I always love a good excuse to really geek out about classic computers. We're really in our element here. And our guest this week has got one of our favourite YouTube channels that delves into particularly loads of classic Apple stuff and Next and obscure prototypes too. So let's welcome on Krazy Ken from YouTube channel The Computer Clan. How you doing, Ken?
Hey guys, how you all doing? I'm doing great.
Yeah, great to have you on, Ken. Like I said, big fans for many years, so it's awesome to finally talk to you. And we always like to kind of find out kind of our guests' geek credentials, kind of going back to day one, what originally got them into what they do today. I mean, do you remember your journey in computers then? What was your first machine and what got you interested originally?
100%. I totally remember. So I was only 2 years old, so I'm going to summon my 2-year-old's brain right now. But my family had a Performa. It was either a Performa or like a Power Mac 6400. I think they both used the same case. I'm just looking at like the old photographs, and that was back when Apple just like had the same case for different models of computer. But either way, it was probably a Performa. So, I grew up in the System 7 era, playing my good old point and click CD-ROMs, like Pajama Sam and Putt Putt Saves the Zoo and all that good stuff. High quality graphics. Hey, it was the early 90s or whatever. It was good stuff. So anyway.
Good for the time. Good for the time.
No, it was amazing. Yeah, I played those games hundreds of times. Like, even though I know how it ends, I'm still playing it. Anyway, that kind of just continued, and then eventually, it's like 2000, 2001, that computer's getting a little clunky, right? So the family decides to move to Windows, which, I didn't really know what that meant. I was like, oh, okay, Windows, yay. And it was fun. I played a lot of games. I don't really play games much anymore, but I played a lot of games back in the day on this Windows PC. It had a lot of problems. The thing stopped working, so we switched back to a Mac like 6-7 years later. And that's where I first started teaching myself video editing because, Apple had iMovie on there and it was just kind of intuitive and easy to use. But then as I kept exploring on how to make videos, that's when I started uploading to YouTube, right? And then as I'm uploading to YouTube, just kind of doing little skits with my friends, not really doing tech stuff yet. The more I keep exploring YouTube, the more I keep like searching my own interests, like, oh, hey, Macs, I want to learn more about Macs. And I keep seeing like all these other channels that are doing like this retro stuff, like trying to upgrade these old computers and stuff. And then I started watching Steve Jobs' like old keynotes, like when he first introduced the iMac and all that stuff. And that time travel really fascinated me. So I would say David DeFranco, aka the creative one, and Alfred de Blasi, those are like the two big retro tech channels I watched back in the day, and they were my main inspirations to start my retro collection, which is more than just Apple stuff, but it's a good chunk of Apple stuff. And my first retro collectible was an Indigo iMac G3, and started doing videos on that. And it just kind of kept going and going from there. And, retro computer stuff isn't the only thing I like to do on YouTube, because there's a lot of different tech things I like to do, but it's one of the big things. I like the history. I like the past stuff. I typically like the older stuff more than the newer stuff, not to sound like a hipster or anything.
You're fitting well here, Ken.
Yes, there we go. So it's turned in from a hobby into a business. YouTube is my business now, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, when you were like researching the Mac and you started seeing it on YouTube and seeing the wider world of it, and back then it was maybe seen as a bit of an underdog, whereas now, there's a pretty big balance with the PC stuff. What did you think about that? And what did you think about other regions of the world where Mac wasn't so popular as well?
Yeah, I kind of just was like, okay, this is the way it is, because Microsoft played the different game with the PC, where they're going to focus on the software and focus on licensing. So they have a bunch of different companies with massive reach to get the PC everywhere. But when you look at PC versus Mac, it's like, well, the PC is a bunch of different companies making up that slice of the pie, right? Apple is just one company. So considering it's just one company versus a bunch, I think the nab or the piece of the pie that Apple has is actually really impressive. And yes, it's gotten bigger, but back then it was smaller. And I was like, whatever. I mean, when I was younger, I was totally into the whole Mac versus PC thing, like being a total troll online. Not really a troll, but
well, Apple even the companies were, the adverts were.
Yeah. I was actually just gonna say that I was, the whole like Justin Long commercials that Apple did, the hi, I'm a Mac, hi, I'm a PC, like that kind of stuff. I think really started those debates and stuff online, and I partook in that. I don't anymore because it's childish and ridiculous. But when I was younger and had nothing better to do, I totally was in the whole Mac versus PC war back in the day. But looking back at it, it's like, well, that's just how it is. Apple has a smaller market share, whatever. The underdog thing kind of makes it interesting in a way, the whole story of Apple. Yeah.
And there was always kind of a Mac in the corner of an office, as the creative computer, and maybe
right, yeah.
Be, dominated with PCs. But
even back like in my middle school, like, of course, it's like going to be all PCs, but we had the one table of 2 iMacs that, they used for iMovie. Which makes sense because there's not really a kid-friendly... This was like 2005, by the way. There's not really like a kid-friendly like editing software on Windows at the time. No FireWire either, so...
Yeah, Windows Movie Maker wasn't the strongest, was it?
No, not really.
Well, I mean, talking a bit more about your YouTube channel, and Ken, I mean, tell us what is the Computer Clan then? Where did this kind of idea come from?
The Computer Clan started because when I was initially making videos with my nice little Sony Handycam and my iMac, I had nowhere to publish them. I was like, I want to share these with people. And this was the middle of 2007, so YouTube was a baby. If I did my homework right, Google hasn't even owned them for a year at this point. This was really baby YouTube when I started. So I started publishing these things on YouTube because I wanted people to leave feedback. I wanted to see what people thought of the videos that I made, even though I wasn't really making really good videos. If you ever see some of my old stuff, you'll be like, whoa, what the heck? But I iteratively kept getting better and better and better. Now it is how it is now. It's, I will humbly say, one of the best produced tech YouTube channels out there, especially considering it's a one-man band. I surprise people when I say this. I don't have a crew.
Oh, wow.
I don't have employees. This is me. I am very blessed to have volunteers that do help out. Sometimes they help me with research. Sometimes they help me film some stuff. But 99.9% of the time, it is all just me.
That's really interesting to hear because, I mean, as you mentioned then, I mean, you put a lot of effort into your production values. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you had a team around you because it looks that good. I mean, have you got kind of a background have you studied like video in the past or anything like that?
Yeah, video.
Or was it all self-taught?
It was all I would say it's a combination of self-built, and I did go to school for it. I didn't go to like a film school or anything, but I started self-teaching myself video production and video editing when I was probably 12. And Yeah, it's mostly self-taught, but I did take classes, and then I ended up teaching some classes, actually. When I graduated from the college, they brought me back to do some adjunct stuff. But yeah, it's a lot of self-taught and just learning how to learn. And I think learning how to learn is one of the best skills you can give yourself.
So where did the name Krazy Ken come from then?
The Krazy Ken thing, I just really like alliterations like CC, Computer Clan, KK, Krazy Ken. I just think it all like bounced really well. But the stupid origin story behind that, and I haven't told this to many people, is once upon a time, I was about to go live on a webcast. We're maybe like 10 minutes out from going on the air. And I don't know if I like was eating a quick snack before or whatever. I don't know what happened, but like a crumb got stuck under the option key on my laptop. And I'm like, crap, I can't press the key now. I got to get this fixed before I go live. So I take the keycap off to clean it. Of course, I break the switch. So now I don't have an option key. And I'm about to go live, and I can't control any of these shortcuts now. And I was kind of like jokingly freaking out while I'm on the conference call, because it's like, what are we going to do? Oh my gosh, we got to go live. This thing isn't working. And I jokingly called myself Krazy Ken. And I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of a clever name. But I didn't really do anything with it until I needed like a character for a show I did later. It was called Krazy Ken's Classic Video Games, where I played retro video games and I reviewed them. And I just kind of wanted to give myself a name. So that's where I started using the name Krazy Ken in published content. But that didn't really go anywhere because my audience isn't really mainly focused on gaming, and I don't even mainly focus on gaming. I was just trying it out. It didn't really work. The tech stuff in general works way more than the game stuff. So the gaming show didn't really succeed, but then it was probably like 2 years later, that's when I started Krazy Ken's Tech Misadventures, where I document myself trying to fix something or tinker with something, and that started taking off.
Well, you cover, modern technology on your channel as well, but obviously retro and rare prototypes are a big part of what you do as well. I mean, why that focus then? Where did that kind of, the prototype kind of element come into it?
The prototype thing came from when I was researching stuff for my Vintage Apple Vault show. The whole concept of Vintage Apple Vault was I was going to like travel and like meet up with collectors and do retrospectives on these like vintage and retro pieces of Apple technology. And while I was researching that, I came across a guy named Hap, who's out in California, and he has a massive prototype collection. He has some insanely rare stuff. And, I'm not like a professional appraiser, but if I had to appraise his collection, he probably has at a minimum, probably $500,000 worth of prototypes.
Oh, wow.
So probably more. He was also on CNBC. So as I was researching him, I saw the CNBC piece where he gave a tour to one of their like cameraman guys. And I saw his collection and I was like, wow, I want to film this for my show. I email him and he emails me back in like 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, this is good. This is a good start. So we hit it off. I go film his massive collection. And then through him, I just started meeting more people in the Apple prototype and Apple internal community. And from there, I started finding more things to collect myself. And I started finding some things on eBay to add to my collection. And then I started doing more videos about those things. And those perform because they're, not always. Like my recent PowerBook G4 prototype one did perform so well, but it's hit or miss sometimes. But generally they perform because they're rare pieces of Apple history that you normally never see because they normally don't get out to the public. And I feel like most people don't have the ability to make videos about that stuff. So I consider that a strength of mine, and I play to that strength.
Well, where'd you actually get hold of them then? You mentioned some Apple internal people. Like, have you robbed Steve Wozniak's basement or anything like that?
Yeah, so a lot of times when a company, or specifically Apple, I won't speak for other companies, but like in regards to Apple's prototypes, at least in the older days, when a project gets finished, sometimes the engineers will get early development models as gifts because they worked on the project. And sometimes that stuff just gets handed down to other people. Sometimes that stuff gets sold. I'm willing to bet, I've never dumpster dove myself, but I'm willing to bet some stuff ends up in a dumpster somewhere and someone retrieves it and it gets online somehow.
I'd love to raid Apple's dumpsters around the back of their,
my gosh.
their HQ.
I know, right? Now, I'm sure they're a lot more like secretive about this stuff now. I don't have anything in my collection that's really new, and I don't know if I would feel comfortable with that in general. It's usually retro stuff that I have, and I'm sure back in the day they were a lot more loose with security of disposal and stuff like that.
Apparently, like Steve Jobs at one of the shows took some prototypes and just chucked them in the bin. Left them at the show, didn't care, and I've also heard that he threw an iPod in a fish tank as well. That was another one. One of the iPod prototypes, and said there's still air in there. So
yeah, make it smaller.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that story, but it doesn't surprise me. That's probably something that happened. But yeah, nowadays, I mean, I'm not the expert on finding like newer prototype type stuff, but I have friends who are. I don't really know how they do it, but they somehow have the magic source.
Well, what are the favorite prototypes that you've covered on the channel then? Your personal faves?
I would say, if we're talking about like things I don't own, there was some really cool stuff that Hap has in his collection. There was a 20th anniversary Macintosh there. And just for context, for those who don't know, the 20th anniversary Macintosh was a very like special flat computer design that Apple only did once. They never made another version of it. It was kind of like the iMac's grandfather. But anyway, he had a silver version of that. It was more of like a champagne, like bronzy color when it released, but he had a silver one with like a marble textured base instead of like the anodized aluminum base. And I'm like, whoa, I've never seen this before. So that TAM prototype that he has is really cool. He also has some clear shot Macs where they made the cases clear so they could see the components working inside during the testing stages. Those I don't have in my collection yet, but super envious of those. Those are really freaking cool.
Were they also like used for airflow and stuff like that? So they'd put smoke in them and kind of see if it went round.
Probably. I've heard stories about that too. And I would say yes, especially because airflow was let's just say a problem with the early Macs. With Steve Jobs' desire of no fan and all that stuff. So yeah. I'm sure they did something with airflow. I've never witnessed that in person, but that would make sense. And personally, in my collection, I would say my favorite piece is that iMac G3 prototype, because I've never seen another one of those anywhere. It's the first generation Bondi Blue iMac G3, but instead of it being like frosted plastic, it's smooth plastic. It doesn't have the EMI shields in it, so you can see into it. And, like certain things are blanked out, like there's no serial number. The logic board is yellow instead of green. It has a floppy drive connector on it with a cable, which is pretty cool. They probably use that for testing. The board has an ADB port on it. They moved away from ADB for USB for the iMac. This prototype still has an ADB port on it, which there's no cutout on the case for it. So it was probably just for like internal testing, whatever. But yeah, I would say that's my coolest prototype. And if we can get it working one day, that would be sick.
I find that really interesting that Apple left a floppy connector header on the board, even though they were telling everyone that no one needed one of those anymore.
That's what makes the story so cool, because it's like you can kind of see like where they've been with this computer, even though, yeah, they were trying to kill that off. And I'm guessing, again, it was on there just to test stuff. But like even on the retail versions, you can see the solder pads. There's no header there, but you can still see the solder pads on the logic board where the floppy drive connector was.
I wonder if new prototype iPhones have got headphone jacks on them still.
that it wouldn't surprise me if that existed somewhere.
Well, have you ever received any like angry emails from Apple for like showing this stuff off? Have you ever had any feedback or anything off them?
No, I never have actually. I've braced myself for that, and through a second hand, I have seen what Apple's legal team says about this kind of prototypey stuff, and generally speaking, they don't really care if it's like older than 5 years or so. So everything in my collection is like prototype wise is probably at least, except for one thing, is like 6 years old. Everything else is probably like 20 something years old. So yeah, generally 5 years is kind of like the rule of thumb. But like, for example, that iMac that left the factory early and it had like all of that like testing software on it by accident. I did an episode about that and it really took off. And I was like fully mentally preparing for Apple to contact me. And I was like, hey, if you guys want this back, you can have it back. Like, go for it. But nothing ever happened. Apple has never contacted me.
If it was Nintendo, it would have just been taken down that video.
God.
Yeah,
Same day.
I'm not I won't go near that place. Not gonna do that.
You know, I find it really interesting, Ken, because, you know, as you mentioned, you were kind of someone who kind of looked at the 80s and 90s Apple stuff, you know, a bit retrospectively, because Apple were a very different company back then. You know, and I remember, because here in the UK, really, I don't remember Macs taking off until like kind of the early 2000s, really. They were a bit more just in publishing houses and stuff like that. I mean, I was a Commodore Amiga fan, you know, when I was younger. But I remember around that time, you had like Atari went bust, Commodore went bust, and really everyone kind of expected Apple to as well.
Yep.
But obviously it had that big resurgence. I mean, kind of looking back retrospectively to the Apple of the 80s and 90s, I mean, what is it you like about those classic machines then? And what differences do you see from Apple today?
I like a lot of the design things they explored with back in the day. I was grateful enough to get my hands on a physical copy of the Apple Design, like industrial group book. It's literally just called Apple Design. And it's so cool to see like photos of all the internal prototype, like hard shell models and the foam models, to see all the different ways they were exploring with industrial design. And I just like seeing how things change, especially when Steve Jobs wasn't there. Because, you know, he was there until 85, and then he was gone until 96. So for those 11 years, I liked seeing visually all the decisions they were making without him there. And there's a mix of like, oh my gosh, that's a really dumb thing. Who would have thought of that? But there's also a mix of like, wow, like Daniel Day-Lewis and like the espresso design language and all this stuff is really cool. Like, who in the early 90s thought about like adding curves to computers and like vents to make it look like it has gills and like a nice curved screen and like feet so it stands on your desk and looks approachable, or like make the floppy drive look like it kind of smiles at you. Like, industrial design was not really a thing in computers except for Apple. So it was really cool seeing them do that. But of course, it was good to see Jobs come back. And like you said, the resurgence in the early 2000s, I totally believe is because of the new strategy he introduced, getting rid of all the confusing product names, simplifying the product strategy, rewriting the operating system to make it more modern, and then doing other things too, like the iPod, to help more people get just aware of Apple. So
because that kind of mid-90s era was a very confusing time for Apple. So even when the clones and all that came along, hard to follow.
Thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, that's another crazy story about how Apple licensed the Mac OS and the Mac ROMs for. They were taking like the Microsoft Windows route almost there to like have other computers make Mac clones, and they were, man, financially struggling so dang hard, and that's why people thought they were going to go bust. And I just think there is like, it's like the perfect story. And that's why there's so many freaking movies made about Steve Jobs, like biopics. Yeah. It's the perfect story of like how he was there and, you know, he wasn't perfect. Nobody is. And then he left, and then the company kind of was okay. And then it started really going down, and then they bring him back, and then it resurges. And now it's like a 2-3 whatever $1 trillion company. It's like, that is the coolest thing to me. I love seeing how like the old stuff like is still like being used today. And that's one of the things I really like about exploring like the next step operating system and all that stuff, and seeing how that stuff evolved into Mac OS. Even simple things like the sound effects, you know, you press a wrong key, it makes the dunk sound, like that was in the next step system, and now it's like a familiar sound in the Mac.
You did an entire video on that, didn't you? Kind of comparing Next Step, you know, this operating system that Steve Jobs and the team at Next made when he left Apple, that obviously Apple then acquired, and that turned into Mac OS 10. For people that haven't seen that video, how similar are Next Step and Mac OS then?
I guess it depends on what era of Mac OS we're talking about, but if we're talking about like the earlier kind of like developer preview days, they were pretty freaking similar, even visually. But then, you know, on the surface, when they did the whole new like Aqua user interface thing, like you wouldn't really be able to tell this was Next. But under the hood, there was a lot of stuff that was Next, a lot of Unix-y things. You know, the dock interface came from Next. The whole way the Finder was laid out with like the column browser view where you select a folder and it like opens up another column with all the sub items in there, that came from the Next. I think they called it like the workstation manager or whatever they called it. And there was a lot of stuff that came from there. Even just in like the developer environment, like if you add things to your application, like an NS text field, like the NS stands for next step. Like that's still, I don't know how common that is today in the Swift world. I haven't developed for Mac in like a billion years, but back when I did, yeah, there was a lot of NS objects, and NS was all next step stuff. Web objects, which Apple used for server-side applications, that was also from Next Step as well.
Well, I think Apple's one of the only companies that's kind of switched its OS to so many different architectures and done it really smoothly, actually, with like emulation of, you know, the other architectures built into the OS a lot of the time. And do you think having that closed kind of walled garden approach of the OS has really helped that company do that? And do you think any other company could do that? Like Windows has been x86 for a long time and that now just kind of moved on to ARM, but it's not done the jump around that Apple have.
I'm going to give like a super gray response. You know, there's pros and cons to everything. I think the way Apple kind of locks things down a little bit and pushes for new technologies really fast is a good thing, because then you don't get stuck with really old stuff under the hood. Sometimes you still do. Like the music app, for example, is still full of iTunes code that is atrocious. But for the most part, it's very modernized. That's how we were able to get to Apple Silicon much more nicely, because they were killing off old things and saying, hey, use these newer APIs. Like, oh, hey, 64-bit only. Okay, we're not maybe sure why, but maybe they're going to be doing an Apple Silicon transition soon. And then boom, later, Apple Silicon. So like they kind of kill off the old things a little quicker and make things move forward better. Now, I think they have an advantage because they have a smaller user base. With stuff like Microsoft, there's like over 1 billion people using Windows. You really can't kill off stuff that quickly. Yeah. I mean, look at Internet Explorer. It just officially got retired like a week ago. But
I think there are still files from Windows 3.1 lurking in Windows 11
there
somewhere.
There probably are.
Icons and stuff.
And
yeah.
like you'll get complaints. Like that's one thing that bugs me about Windows 10. It's getting better with 11, but like Windows 10, for example, there's like 4 different design languages mixed in there. It's confusing for like what properties are in the settings app and what things are still in the legacy control panel. That happens when you don't push and kill off old technologies really fast. You get that confusion.
And it is kind of a pushing forward. It's kind of a brutal approach, right? It's like, you know, for developer wise, we're from the Amiga world, and developers would be like, oh, we can't run it on that new architecture. It'd be like, don't worry, it's going to be good. You know, that's the kind of Apple approach, and it works, you know?
I think it does work for the better part of all the times they've been doing it. But yeah, in a position like Microsoft, like they need to have, in my opinion, they need to keep that older stuff in there, because there's like 1 billion users and probably more, and a lot of them still need that older support. Like I'm sure there's still a bunch of systems running XP out there. You know, that system came out in 2001, but it's probably still being used somewhere.
Oh, guaranteed.
Yeah, but I doubt there's
probably still running 95 still, I think.
Could be, for all I know. I mean, but the thing is, like, that's what Microsoft's good at. They're really good at backwards compatibility. And like, you'll see systems out there probably still running Windows XP, but you'll probably not see a system out there running a Mac equivalent of that year. You'll probably never see a Mac in public running 10.1, you know, for something, but you'll probably see XP or something out there, because that's just Microsoft's strength. They're really good at long-term support and backward compatibility.
Yeah, I mean, I generally keep my my old Power Macs on Tiger.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a good compromise, because you've got the OS 9 stuff, you know, compatibility layer is still in there. So that's a sweet point.
That's true. That's true. And on top of that, I do want to add one more thing. I don't think people give Apple enough credit for all of the open source stuff they've actually contributed to the computer world. Because a lot of people say, well, it's all closed source and proprietary. Well, spoiler alert, so is Microsoft Windows. It's not an open source operating system. But like Apple was a big player in OpenGL, OpenCL, the common Unix printing system, WebKit, Darwin back in the day, the kernel of their OS, it was open sourced. And like things are changing now, like they're trading off OpenGL for Metal, and they're probably locking it down a little bit more. But for years, like there still is a ton of open source stuff in the OS, but for going as far back as I can remember, they were big players in the open source world. So I just hope people give them some credit for that. It's not all just some closed off system. I don't think that's how it is at all.
And I mean, you know, kind of going back to that Next legacy, one of my favorite videos you did on your channel is when you got your hands on a Next Cube a couple of years ago and did like an in-depth look inside that as well. I mean, what do you think of the Next Cube and the Next machines as hardware and systems?
Man, the Next machines are so cool looking back at. I mean, in at the time, I don't know if I could have justified spending that much money on that system, but in the end, Next ended up really being a software company, not much of a hardware company. Because, hey, Apple acquired Steve Jobs in the software and it all worked out, but the hardware kind of stayed behind. But anyway, from a collector's perspective, the hardware is so freaking cool. Like, what other computer is just like a monolith, like cube black box thing with like these 4 expansion slots on the inside? Like, it's just such a cool device to have. And, back before it was called the Next Cube, it was still cube shaped. It was just called the Next Computer. We had some smart minds using them to create really cool things. Like Tim Berners-Lee, the first World Wide Web software web server was run on a Next Computer, and I just think it's really cool. That
have you tried it on the original browser on your Next Cube?
I have not successfully networked that thing with the internet. Brainiac Brent, my buddy, got it to work like as an FTP server locally, so we were able to transfer files to it, but I've never gotten it to like web browse.
Oh, you need to host your website on it. That'd be awesome. That'd be absolute retro. That'd be.
Oh man, the funny thing is, I'm actually working with a team on an all new website right now. So like that's why I recently like revisited Apple's website software, iWeb, just for fun. And now people are asking me like, "Hey, you gonna make your new website on iWeb?" Yeah, totally. I'll use a 2009 program to make this amazing website.
We had this idea actually for our website because we've got like a modern version, but Ravi does our website. I keep saying to him, we need like a button you can click that takes you back to like, a 90s GeoCities style
downgrade button. Yeah. No frames or frames.
Spinny GIFs and all that. Yeah.
I actually, that's not a bad idea. I should probably do that with the Computer Clan. I think a lot of our audience would like that because we do so much retro stuff. So, might have a good idea brewing there.
Well, when kind of Next happened, like, if you're a real computer geek, you must have thought this is amazing, but the wider industry just must have thought this is madness. You've got a really expensive cube that does nothing. But in the end of the day, it ended up kind of, do you think, help save Apple?
Yeah, they totally saved Apple. And that's why I was like kind of giggling about this, but also being serious. Like at the time, Next looked like a joke. It was an expensive, I think in this one of the Steve Jobs movies, they called it like a $10,000 dictionary.
Yeah.
But yeah, the software from it and the team that Steve Jobs had, when they moved over to Apple, they 100% saved Apple. No doubt in my mind. And because it was the software, but it was most importantly Steve Jobs. But you also had Bertrand Serlet. He came over later too, and he did a lot of stuff with macOS engineering. And then also from Next, Craig Federighi, Air Force One, everybody loves him. He was at Next too, and he came over to Apple in 2009. Yeah, later, but still a pivotal piece of the puzzle here, because look at what he's doing with the software teams now. It's huge at Apple. That's one thing I learned from an interview with Randy Ubilos. He was the guy that was the chief architect of the new version of Final Cut Pro. He was the chief architect of the first version of Adobe Premiere. When he was talking about getting acquired by Apple, he was talking about like when a company acquires someone else, like generally they're not acquiring the software, they're acquiring the people. The people are what's important. So yeah, the Next software was important, but most importantly, it was Jobs and the other people that were acquired with that.
Because it's really interesting, because I mean, for people that maybe didn't follow Apple in that era, Apple were trying to do their own operating system, that was going to be the next thing, codename Copeland.
Yeah.
And that had some, they were trying for years, couldn't make it work, and in the end ended up buying, another operating system, which was Next. Mm-hmm. I mean, have you, I thought you did a video on Copeland, but I couldn't find it today. Maybe I imagined it. I mean, have you used Copeland, and is that something you've covered?
I actually haven't used Copeland yet, but I think that would make for an epic retrospective one of these days. I actually haven't touched that one yet. That and AUX I would like to do, because like their early Unix Mac OS software, I would like to tackle both of those. Those sound cool.
Yeah, I think you need like a really specific model,
probably
of like G3 to run it on, or something like that, maybe even earlier.
That wouldn't surprise me. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure, but that wouldn't surprise me at all, because like even the Mac OS 10 developer preview, it's like, you need like a blue and white G3, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm lucky I happen to have one, but it like wouldn't install on anything else.
Yeah, check the serial number. Is it this one? We're now kind of talking about, Apple in that era. I know the other option, because I was following this at the time, was, there's a company called B who had a great operating system called BeOS. And Apple also considered buying them for a while, but I think, they wanted too much money. I mean, have you used BeOS before? And how do you think in an alternate world, what would that have been, a better or worse choice?
My gosh.
All hypothetical.
I legit have fantasized about this exact scenario. So I have not used BeOS a ton yet. At the Vintage Computer Festival in Chicago, I played on a B-Box for a little bit, but I'm not super versed in it. But I have thought about like what the alternate future would be if Apple acquired B. And from a technical perspective, I don't really know what that would have meant for the operating system. But from a people perspective, it would have meant they probably wouldn't have gotten jobs back. Or at least they wouldn't have gotten jobs back for maybe another 10 years or so. So if you think about it, the iPod might not have happened. Or it would have happened maybe like 10 years later. So then the iPhone might not have happened. Or it would have happened 10 years later. And then like, think about the iPad. It's a domino effect. A bunch of the things we use today from Apple might have been like 5 or 10 years delayed if they didn't bring Jobs and his guys back from Next.
Yeah, because B was a great operating system, but they didn't really have any success on their own. So
right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, although I do look at those B boxes, and they're definitely on my
Stuff
dream
of
hardware.
dreams,
they are cool. Oh, God, yeah. They are cool. Yeah, I need to make some more time to collect some other things. Like I'd like to do some B stuff. I'd love to do some Silicon Graphics stuff. Their computers are just cool looking, all blue and purple and everything. I'd love to mess with those too. Absolutely.
If people are interested in BeOS, obviously there's a modern version of it, isn't there? Haiku. Which is open source, and that's really good, actually. I did a little video on YouTube kind of delving into that. So that's kind of an interesting look at where it could have gone, actually.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a Haiku Linux distro. Is that the same one?
No, this is it's a modern evolution of BeOS.
Okay.
So they kind of open sourced it and rewrote a lot of the components. So it runs on modern PCs, though. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely worth a look.
Fun.
You did a video on Apple mice and the evolution of them, and I remember one of the first time I used a Apple mouse, and it was like I was so used to right clicking and all of this stuff. I was like, what is going on? So which ones are your favorites, and what do you think about the kind of history of Apple mice?
None. Okay, I'll be honest. I love still like the old designs of them and everything, but like, gosh darn it, man, it took until when did they release the Mighty Mouse, which they couldn't call the Mighty Mouse because of legal reasons? That was like 2006 or whatever. They didn't have a scroll ball or a scroll wheel until like 2005, 2006. Like, are you kidding me? Like other like PC mice had scroll wheels in like the mid 90s. So the lack of a right click didn't bug me a whole lot because whatever. I mean, if you want to be a real power user, you control click like a man to open your menus. But yeah, no scroll wheel. Like that really bugged me.
I remember the scroll ball on the Mighty Mouse. It used to get really dirty, and you'd have to rub it on paper or on a rubber to get all the dirt off.
Yeah, people give the Mighty Mouse crap. I personally like it, but yeah, the one big problem with that scroll ball is, if you don't keep it clean, it'll just stop working. But when it does work, it's really cool because, especially to like, middle schooler me using a Mac for the first time in years, being able to scroll in a 360-degree direction was like really cool. So their newer mice I really like. I still use a Magic Mouse. I've been using a Magic Mouse since 2009, which I love because being able to scroll in all directions smoothly with like inertia, like scrolling on an iPhone nice and smooth like that, like that's really handy to me. And I haven't been able to replicate that with any other mouse with a mechanical wheel.
Yeah, I miss it when I have to use Windows. Not being able to horizontally scroll is just weird.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh. Especially like with video editing, I really like having smooth horizontal scrolling because your timeline's going to move left and right.
Yeah.
So having the Magic Mouse for that is super handy, and like being able to do a 2-finger swipe to move the playhead to the next clip or the previous clip, just super handy shortcuts that no other mouse, like I've never seen another multi-touch mouse do what the Magic Mouse can do. But yeah, Apple did some cool things with their mice, like doing the optical stuff and like the clear cases and all that. But yeah, not having a right click or a scroll wheel for years was like, what? And the puck mouse. Let's just bring that up.
About that one. Yeah.
I was waiting for that one.
Yeah, that was probably another Next thing that came over because Next had a circular mouse, and now Apple's like, hey, here's this circular mouse for the iMac, and You know, people joked about it, saying it caused like carpal tunnel syndrome and all that, because it is weird. I won't lie, it's weird. I do have like I forgot what it's called, but it's like an accessory for the puck mouse it attaches to it to shape it like a normal mouse.
Oh wow, I'd never seen that before.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
See, if you're like a 5-year-old, they're probably all right.
Yeah,
But
probably.
for anyone over the age of like 15 whose hands are growing a bit, it was
Give
just,
a modern
not
kid
good.
a puck mouse. I'd be so confused.
Oh my gosh, that'd be funny to see.
Well, here's a question that might require a bit of thought. I mean, obviously, you know, you've got some favorite Apple products, and I mean, if you were to say, you know, name your favorite and worst classic Apple products, what would they be?
My favorite is the TAM, because the 20th anniversary Macintosh is just such a cool, unique design that they never replicated. You know, with like the nice like fabric speakers and the Bose sound system, like they never did anything like that again. It's so cool. So I'd say that's my favorite. My least favorite, yeah, I would have to think about that. This isn't meant to disrespect the amazing industrial design group that made this, but like the Molar Mac, what the hell was going on with that thing? Like that was like a middle like beige iMac thing. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? The G3 all-in-one.
Yes, yes, I do. Like late 90s.
Yeah.
So it still had the CRT kind of back, but
Yep,
it was weird.
It was a giant beige CRT 80-pound computer. It kind of had like a clearer plastic back, kind of like the new design language they were moving to with like the clear plastics and stuff. It had a bit of that on there, but the rest was beige, and it had like 2 floppy drives on the front and a CD drive, so it looked like a face that was squinting at you. It was called the Molar Mac because it was shaped like a big molar tooth. It was just heavy and beige and kind of weird looking, but still cool. I mean, weird stuff is cool. So I wouldn't mind having one in my collection if someone wants to lift it for me, but I would say that's one of like I don't know if I'd say the worst, but one of the odder design choices that they did that they never repeated again.
See, from that era, it's like, you know, when they went from those kind of boring beige machines, and then we got all the wild colours, you know, that Steve Jobs brought in like the G3 era.
Yeah.
Because I remember I got my first Mac was the Snow iBook G3s, so not the toilet seat one, the one that came later. But yeah, Apple just went through so much evolution. There's like 5 years going from beige to the coloured ones to that, you know, the classic white stuff that we got later. So it was quite an interesting time for Apple design aesthetics, I thought, the late 90s.
I loved the late 90s with, you know, the whole colorful iMac thing and the colorful laptops. I'm so glad they're getting back to that. Like when they introduced the new iMac in those like 7 colors, I was like, yes, I want to hear Jeff Goldblum's voice just talk about those things again, just like in the old commercials. But yeah, it was something that was really, it really stood out because like, you know, I think Guy Kawasaki made the joke of like, you can have a computer in any color you want as long as it was beige. But like Apple was like, hey, color. And Steve Jobs even talked about this during one of his keynotes where he was like, we asked a lot of people what attributes of a computer were important to them. And like, they rarely said anything about hard drive space or like, you know, processor speed. But when we asked them what their favorite color was, like people had a favorite color. So they made color important. And for a long time, color was in Apple's products. And yeah, then it kind of went away. And then it like kind of came back with like the iPod Nano, but everything else was like, everything else was like white. And then they started doing like silver and space gray, but now we're getting colors back, which is really cool. But of course I still buy silver.
Well, I was wondering, there's like so many different computer systems, and especially in Europe and in Britain, we have, oh God, so many. Are there any ones that interest you, like Acorn or systems like that?
So I'd say currently the main stuff I've been diving more into is Apple and Next. I really like those two. I do kind of like what I was hinting at earlier. I'd love to get into SGI, you know, the Silicon Graphics computers, because they're really funky looking. And the iRix operating system, like I've barely ever touched iRix before. So I'm really interested in SGI. So that would probably be the next thing I look into. Maybe some BeOS stuff. And I do have a Commodore 64 sitting around. I need a new power supply for it, so I haven't really done anything with it recently. And I do also have a TRS-80 Model 3, but something's wrong with the analog board, and I'm not a skilled repair technician. Yeah, like the computer boots up, but the CRT just shows a bunch of scrambly lines. It looks kind of weird, but it's useless right now. So yeah, might tinker with some Commodore and TRS stuff in the future.
Yeah, the SGI machines, they're just, I've used one we've got a computer history centre in Cambridge here in the UK, and I went and sat down in front of one of them and playing with IRIX, and they had like the Nintendo 64 like development kit and stuff was on there too. Ooh, and it was sweet. Just kind of seeing all that. It was, just like those machines though, I mean, they cost more than a house back in the day, didn't they? But,
and those kind of tickle my fancy in two ways. Not only do they play to my interest in retro computers, but because I have a video background, I love that aspect of SGI as well, because they were used in composition and visual effects for movies and stuff. So, I don't know the full story, but when you watch Jurassic Park and you see those Silicon Graphics computers, I bet you $1 million those were the same computers that were used for post-production later in the process of making the movie, not just as props. If I had to guess.
Yeah, I think there are about 20 of them networked, I think, to render the dinosaurs. Yeah, so really powerful machines.
That sounds right. And speaking of that movie, the Quadra in that movie, the Quadra 700, man, I love that. Little sneak peek of a future episode, I was blessed enough to come across a Quadra 700 prototype. So there will be a future episode on that. And we are going to reenact a small scene from Jurassic Park with Samuel Jackson. I'm going to actually I'm going to have a cigarette and everything and be like, hold on to your butts. And we're going to have some fun with it. But yeah,
you need to get Newman on your on your password thing.
Yeah. Oh, dude, totally. I was actually, if I had enough time, hopefully I can make enough time for this. I wanted to make my own version of that, where I have my face up there, shaking my finger.
Oh, amazing.
You didn't say the magic word. Dang, I hate this hacker crap.
Classic scene.
Yes. Oh yeah.
I love spotting old machines in movies as well.
Yes.
I was watching randomly on TV the other week The Net with Sandra Bullock, where she's using Mac OS 7 all the way through that film as well. That's quite funny to watch.
Oh no, I totally love that stuff too. People were talking about For All Mankind, the Apple TV Plus series. They were using Newtons as props in the recent episodes, but of course they were composited and stuff. So people were video chatting on them, which of course you couldn't do in real life, but it was still Apple Newton message pad props they were using, which was really cool.
Oh, wow.
I remember watching I used to be a fan of a TV show called The Tribe, which was a post-apocalyptic series, and all the parents had died and they all had PowerPC Macs, the ones with the Bondi Blue and stuff. And I was like, oh, nice. The whole future's Mac then. Okay.
Yeah, good. It worked out. I love that kind of stuff. It, circling back to Jeff Goldblum, Independence Day, he used the PowerBook prototype to hack into the spaceship. I freaking love that. And that was an actual prototype. I actually, in one of my episodes, in a couple of my episodes, I show it probably wasn't that exact one used on camera, but it was a PowerBook prototype where Apple silk screened 4 X's after PowerBook on the bezel instead of the model number, which is weird because you would actually take the time to silk screen a placeholder, PowerBook XXXX. But yeah, they did it for some of their PowerBook prototypes back in the day. It's kind of cool to see.
Especially as a product placement, something you couldn't actually buy. I thought was a bit strange.
Yeah, I was like, dang, I want to buy this prototype, but no, it's I'll get the boring retail version. The other thing, Batman and Robin, that movie where they used the prototype 20th anniversary Macintosh. I'm just like, oh my gosh, where is this thing? Someone has to have it still. The Spartacus prototype.
You'd hope it didn't end up in a dumpster or something.
I hope it hasn't ended up. Gosh, because that was a really cool design. It was different than how it ended up being in the end, which I love seeing. But from what I understand from the stories of the Industrial Design Group, it was an operational prototype. It wasn't just some hard model. It actually had a board and software, and it worked. So I hope someone somewhere has it and is taking care of it.
There is actually a website, isn't there, dedicated to I think it's starringthecomputer.com that shows you, it's a list of movies and which computers have been in them.
Oh, sweet.
It's a really good website. So yeah, if you're ever interested in if you spot something obscure in a film, you're like, what computer is that? Then normally got it on that website.
That's actually really good to know, because I was thinking of doing an episode about Macs in famous movie and TV show scenes. I'm not sure how much list videos would really perform on my channel, so I haven't really done it yet, but that is something I did consider doing. And I would definitely talk about Jurassic Park and Independence Day, for example.
Yeah, new series of Stranger Things. There's an Amiga 1000 in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, literally rewound it about 4 times watching it over and
over.
Dude,
I'm the same way, because it's it's like when I'm watching like Jurassic Park with my friend, she's like really into dinosaurs. So she's loving the dinosaurs, and I'm looking at the Quadra 700.
You're missing the point of the movie.
Yeah. Ken, it's about dinosaurs. I don't care. I want the Quadra. My gosh.
Wait,
You do a few videos on Windows, and you've done like a commemorative install of Windows Vista as well.
Yeah.
Do you think Vista kind of deserves the hate that it got?
No, I don't think it did. And in the time, there were a lot of upset people because, like, there was a huge gap from XP to Vista, and Vista was maybe a little buggy and it didn't support people's hardware, so people made fun of it. And then, of course, Apple making fun of it didn't help. So looking back at it, no, I think it got more hate than it really deserved. Yes, it had its problems, but like, hello, Windows Millennium Edition, that was like a cluster. But anyway, it was it was a little blown out of proportion, and Vista got better with time, and I believe Service Pack 1 patched a lot of the problems. And from a nostalgic perspective, well, I don't have a ton of a nostalgic attachment to Vista, honestly, because when we had our family PC, we were still on XP, so we never made the jump to Vista. But from just a retro perspective, I love using Vista because it was just so pretty. It had a really pretty interface, and I love the whole like Longhorn developer story behind it. Seeing all the different like graphical user interfaces Microsoft tested before they stuck with Vista's current look. I just love it.
You've done a video on that, haven't you? Kind of showing the prototype.
Yeah, I did explore some of the Longhorn stuff. It was a old video. I would love to touch Longhorn again someday. But yeah, I showed like 3 different builds of Longhorn, and it's just so much fun to see. Wow, the taskbar looks totally different. The start button looks different. The menu, the sidebars, like it all looks different. And they changed it a lot while they were trying to find a look that worked. And I love that kind of evolution.
Talking about your hardware collection then, I mean, what's your classic computer collection like? And, kind of how many would you say you have? And what items are you most proud of in your collection?
I'd say I have about 30. It's definitely not as big as some of my friends. Like my buddy Steve from the Mac84 YouTube channel probably has over 100. My buddy Greg from Rutk Mods probably has over like 120, 130. So yeah, it's small and humble. And I would say, it is more Apple because I like their story. I love their history, but I do have the NEC stuff, of course. I have some NEC stuff. I do have a Commodore 64. I have a TRS-80. I do have a Macintosh clone that I would love to get back to working on a video about. But yeah, it definitely is more of an Apple lean. And I would say man, it's hard to pick. I have like 4 like really crown jewels of the thing. I will say that prototype iMac G3 probably takes the cake because that thing is incredibly rare. I've never seen it before. But aside from that, I would say like the Next Cube and the 20th anniversary Macintosh are like the crown jewels of the collection.
How do you store them? I mean, have you got like a dedicated area then, or are they just kind of all around your house, wherever they fit in?
I have like 2 kind of dedicated areas, and like the main one is the one everybody sees in the background. Because like in the background of my episodes, I have like those shelves and stuff. So I put those there on purpose to display them. But then behind the scenes, I do have like 2 different like 4 level shelves that just hold a bunch of stuff. There's and then there's a spot on the floor for towers because they're too tall to be on the shelf. And then I do have a small storage room, a little like right next to my office here, where I do have a couple of things in there, and including the Macintosh TV. That one's chilling in there right now too.
Nice.
Well, what do you think of the recent ending of the iPod range? And do you have any classic iPods yourself?
I do have an iPod Mini, and I recently found my iPod Touch 2nd gen from when I was a kid. We gave it away a long time ago to like my cousin or something. So I was like getting on the phone and be like, hey, can we track this down? And yeah, we found it. Still has my name engraved on the back. So yeah, I got a couple iPods. As for the news, like I kind of knew it was going to happen, but I never like really knew when it was going to happen. So when Apple officially announced it, and even people like Phil Schiller were talking about it, I was like, whoa, this is like really the end of an era now. The iPod is like, it's done. And then Apple's like, all right, iPod Touch, that's all we have left on our store while supplies last. And like, boom, they were gone in like, less than a day? So Yeah, it was a little shocking, but not fully surprising because they haven't updated it in forever.
They're still nice devices to have, though. We went away on a trip recently, and I didn't know whether we were going to have good Wi-Fi or phone signals. So I actually just stacked up an 80 gig iPod with a load of music on there just for the hotel room and, just for walking around with it. It worked really well, having some nice headphones on it. So I think there is definitely still I know it's a bit of a niche use these days, but I think it is quite still a nice thing to have.
Oh, totally.
A nice MP3 player.
Absolutely. I think that, I've seen a lot of my viewers say they wish Apple would make like a revised or like a rebooted iPod Classic. They're not going to do that because the market for that's incredibly slim. It's very niche, like you said. But there's other people out there that sell mods, different colors. You can like send in your iPod Classic and get the colors changed. You can get, put an SSD or like a, SSD or like C compact flash or whatever in there to, make it really fast instead of a mechanical hard drive. So yeah, I still see the use. I'm all about the cloud, so I stream all my stuff, but it's still nice that, like Apple Music, for example, you can save stuff offline for, like, in your example, if you don't know what the Wi-Fi is going to be like. It's nice that you can save stuff offline. But yeah, there is absolutely still a use for the older ones with hard drives in them. Just put a bunch of music on them. Plug in a headphone, which you can't do on a modern iPhone anyway. So,
exactly.
Load it up, put it in your car or whatever, go out and hike, do it. It still works. Totally does. My Mini still works. The battery, it wasn't mine like as a kid. It was given to me by a friend, but like battery still works. I can hike with it or go wherever. Sync it with a good old 30-pin cable and off to the races.
Well, Ken, it's been incredible reminiscing with you over the last hour or so. I mean, and obviously, like we said, huge fans of your channel. I mean, is there anything coming up that you can tell us about over the next few weeks on the channel?
Yeah, coming up, I would say, actually, just today, the time we're recording this, I just dropped my latest scam buster into those fake solid-state drives that people are trying to sell on the internet. I had a lot of fun making that one. And coming up next, depending on when people are listening to this episode, but on June 30th, I believe it's like the iPhone's like 15th anniversary or like it's around that time. It's near that time, yeah. I'm dropping a very special iPhone 4 prototype episode. I collaborated with Dongle Book Pro, and he has several iPhone 4 prototypes, including the one that has like a Death Star logo on it. Before Apple put their own logo on it, they put proto logos on them. So we're going to show these really rare iPhone 4 prototypes on June 30th, talk about the history, and also talk about the drama of the iPhone 4, like how it was left, the prototype was left in that bar before it got released. So, the whole antenna gate controversy. So like, it's like the most drama-filled iPhone release ever, and I'll be launching an awesome retrospective about it on June 30th. So that's coming up.
Well, looking forward to that. The fact that the iPhone's 15 years old has just made my jaw drop.
I know, it's pretty insane. And on top of that, another thing I hinted at earlier, the whole Quadra 700 prototype, I will be dropping something with that soon. And also, with Apple's new MacBook Air coming out, they haven't announced the date yet, but when it comes out, I would love to do like a comparison with a first generation MacBook Air, just to see how far we've come, because this is the first time Apple ditched the wedge shape. They finally ditched the wedge shape after all these years. So I'd love to do like a hands-on, just kind of like first impressions comparison. But I would also love to do a retrospective of the first gen MacBook Air and talk about all the things it introduced to Apple and parts of the computer industry. For example, like it was the first solid state drive Mac. It was the first Mac with a chiclet keyboard. It was the first Mac notebook with a LED backlit display, the unibody, all this cool stuff that it introduced. I'd love to do a retrospective on that as well. So yes, lots of good stuff coming up. iPhone, Quadra, Mac, good stuff's coming.
Brilliant. Ken, well, listen, obviously we'll link your channel in our show notes. Everyone should go check it out. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.